The boy couldn't have been more than 8. Barefoot, clutching a torn backpack, he stood at the edge of the biker lot, a world of roaring engines and leather vests that smelled of oil and smoke. When he spoke, his voice was too steady for someone that small. "Can one of you be my dad for just one day?" The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, just confused, until the club president killed his engine, stepped off his Harley, and asked, "Who sent you, kid?" The answer froze every man there. "My mom," he said. "She said you owe her a life." Asterisk the dessert woke slow, as if it didn't want to. A pale orange sun pushed through a wall of dust, painting the town of Ridgefall in the color of rust and regret. Wind carried the scent of gasoline, dry earth, and old whiskey, the perfume of the forgotten. Out on the edge of town, beyond the cracked highway signs and the junkyards, stood the Hells Angels clubhouse, a squat, corrugated metal building that looked more like a failed mechanic's shop than the headquarters of an outlaw chapter. The walls were scarred with graffiti, the parking lot littered with cigarette butts, busted beer bottles, and sleeping motorcycles that still ticked faintly from the heat of last night's ride. Inside, the aftermath of a party hung thick in the air. A radio played somewhere, a lazy blues riff barely audible beneath the sound of snoring men and creaking furniture. A few bikers lay passed out on the floor, patches gleaming under the neon light. Ridgefall chapter. Angels till death. The pool table was covered in playing cards, dollar bills, and a half-empty bottle of Jack that had long since gone warm. At the far end of the room, behind a scarred oak desk, sat Rafe Ghost Donovan, 40-something, built like a man who'd been through more fights than conversations. Tattoos ran down his arms like dark veins, most notably the one on his right forearm, a grinning skull wreathed in smoke. He was cleaning his gun, quiet and methodical, as dawn leaked through the blinds. The others knew better than to disturb him during these hours, the silence before the day's noise, the ritual that kept his demons at bay. Rafe was the kind of man who didn't believe in second chances, but life, cruel and strange as it was, had decided to give him one anyway, whether he wanted it or not. Outside, a dust storm was trying to rise, little swirls spinning across the parking lot. The only movement came from a small figure walking down the empty road, a boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing sneakers held together with duct tape and a too-big hoodie that used to be red but now looked more like the dessert itself. He clutched something in his hands, a creased photograph, and walked with a purpose that didn't belong to someone his size. When he reached the clubhouse gate, he stopped. The sign above read, "Private property trespassers will bleed." He hesitated, swallowed, and then did something brave and foolish at once. He walked right inside, a biker named Tank, a mountain of a man with a beard like roadkill and a heart he didn't admit. He had spotted him first. "Hey, what the hell?" The boy froze. He looked around at the bikes, the men, the chaos, and for a moment, it was clear he was scared out of his mind. I'm looking for someone," he said. Tank frowned. "Kid, this ain't no church. You lost." The boy shook his head, gripping the photograph tighter. "My mom said to find the man with the skull tattoo." That got their attention. A few men exchanged wary looks. Others laughed, thinking it a prank. One of them, a weary biker named Slim, leaned forward from the couch, a cigarette dangling from his mouth. "Well, ain't that cute?" Slim said. "We got ourselves a scavenger hunt. You hear that, Ghost? Kid's looking for your ugly mug." Rafe didn't look up. Tell him to keep walking, but the boy took a few steps closer, his shoes scraping the concrete. He held out the photograph, shaking but determined. "Please, sir, my mom said you'd help. She said you owe her a life." That stopped everything. Even the radio went silent. Rafe finally lifted his eyes. He saw a boy with dirt-streaked cheeks, hair that hadn't seen a comb in weeks, and eyes too serious for his age. The picture in his hand was old, bent, creased, but clear enough. A woman in a nurse's uniform, smiling softly at the camera. On the back, written in faint blue ink, was a name, Mara. Rafe's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, he forgot to breathe. The room blurred for a moment, replaced by a memory, asphalt under his back, headlights spinning, the taste of iron and blood in his mouth. He'd been shot twice that night, ambushed by a rival crew out on Highway 19. He remembered the sound of engines fading, his brother scattered, and the cold certainty that he wasn't getting up again. Then, the crunch of tires. A van, a woman's voice. "Stay with me, Rafe. You hear me?" You don't die tonight. He remembered her hands, steady and warm despite the chaos, cutting open his vest, pulling the bullet from his shoulder with nothing but a pair of pliers and pure stubbornness. He tried to tell her to leave, that they'd come back, but she didn't. When he woke up in a hospital bed 2 days later, she was gone. No name, no record, just a ghost who'd saved a ghost. Now her son stood in front of him. Rafe stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. The boy flinched but didn't back away. What's your name? Rafe asked. Eli. And where's your mom now? The boy hesitated. His lower lip trembled. I don't know. She told me to find you, she said. If she didn't come back, you'd make sure I was safe. A murmur rippled through the room. Rafe's expression didn't change, but his fingers curled into fists. She didn't come back from where? Ellie's voice broke when he spoke. Some men came. They had guns. She told me to run. Tank knelt down beside the boy, his gravelly voice softer now. What kind of men? Eli shook his head. I don't know. They had black cars, and one of them said something about the shipment. Rafe exchanged a look with Slim. The kind that said this isn't random. Ridgefall was full of dirty deals and missing people, but this smelled different. They got the kid some water and a sandwich. He ate like he hadn't seen food in days. Between bites, he told them fragments of his story, how they'd moved from town to town, how his mom worked in clinics and shelters, patching up addicts and drifters for free. She said people don't need heroes. He said quietly, they just need someone who doesn't walk away. That line hit Rafe harder than the whiskey ever could. He studied the boy while the others pretended not to. There was a small scar on Ellie's arm, clean, old, surgical. The kind of scar left by someone who knew how to treat wounds. Your mom do that? Rafe asked. Eli nodded. She said I fell off a bike, but I think she lied. She always lied when she wanted to protect me. Rafe looked away, swallowing hard. Mara had been like that too, fearless on the outside, breaking on the inside. By noon, the clubhouse felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. Slim wanted to take the boy to the sheriff. Tank argued that wasn't safe. Ridgefall's cops were more loyal to caste than conscience. Rafe said nothing for a long time. He just stared at the photograph, thumb tracing the edges like it might give him answers. Finally, he stood and walked toward the boy. You said your mom told you to find the man with the skull tattoo, Rafe said. Eli nodded. Why? She said you owed her a life. Rafe crouched so they were eye level. You know what that means, kid. Eli met his gaze, unflinching. It means you're supposed to save someone. And now it's my turn. Something in that answer, innocent, brutal, true, cracked something open in Rafe he hadn't felt in years. That night, after the others drifted out, Rafe sat alone in the garage. The boy was asleep on a couch, a blanket too big for him pulled up to his chin. Rafe smoked in silence, staring at the skull tattoo on his arm. The desert wind rattled the windows, carrying echoes of the past, the sound of gunfire, a woman's voice saying, You don't die tonight. He pulled out his old photo box, the one he swore he'd never open again. Inside were the ghosts of another life, patches from fallen brothers, his parole papers, and a blood-stained piece of cloth from the night he almost died. And tucked inside that cloth, a name, written on the back of a clinic card, Mara Kellen. He'd never gone looking for her. Maybe he'd been afraid to. Maybe he thought he didn't deserve to. But now her son was sleeping under his roof, and she was out there somewhere, in danger, maybe worse. Rafe crushed out his cigarette and stood. His reflection in the window looked older than it should have, but his eyes were alive again, sharp, focused, and filled with a purpose he hadn't felt in a decade. He turned to Tank, who'd been quietly watching from the doorway. Get the boys, Rafe said. We're gonna find her. Tank raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Could be a trap. Rafe's voice was low, steady. Don't care. That woman saved my life once. I ain't letting her slip away. He looked toward the couch, where Eli stirred in his sleep, murmuring his mother's name. Besides, Rafe added quietly, Kid's already lost enough. By the time the engines roared to life outside, the desert was dark again, and the ghosts of Ridgefall were awake. Rafe didn't know yet what he was riding into, or how deep the trouble ran. All he knew was this. The woman who once refused to let him die had sent her son to him for a reason, and for the first time in years, the outlaw known as Ghost Donovan felt like he might be about to live for something, or someone, that actually mattered. The morning started with the sound of engines, a low, steady rumble that seemed to shake the desert awake. Rafe Ghost Donovan stood beside his Harley, watching the sun climb over Ridgefall. The light caught on the chrome, on the cracked asphalt, on the dust that never seemed to settle. Here, he wasn't used to mornings that felt this quiet or this strange. A kid was sleeping on his clubhouse couch, a kid who called him Dad, even if just for one day. When Eli woke, he blinked like someone who didn't quite trust that the world was still here. Rafe handed him a mug of cocoa, dark, no sugar, the only kind they had, and a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil. The boy held it with both hands. "You made this." "Not exactly," Rafe said, half grinning. "Tank burned it. I rescued it. Team effort." Eli laughed softly, a sound that startled the room. The other bikers froze mid-argument, like they'd just heard something rare and delicate. It was the first time any of them had seen Rafe smile, without whiskey behind it. Later that morning, the kid's wish came up again, half a joke, half a dare. "You really said you wanted one of us to be your dad for a day?" Slim asked. Leaning against his bike, Eli nodded. "Yeah, just one day. That's what Mom said to ask for." Rafe gave him a curious look. "Why one day?" Eli thought about it. "She said one day's enough to see who someone really is." That shut Slim up. Rafe figured there was no harm in it. The kid needed distraction, and maybe, if he was honest, so did he. So he told the boys to clear their schedules. No business, no runs, no fights, just one clean day. They didn't understand why their leader suddenly cared about a stray, but none dared argue. They followed Rafe because, when he gave an order, it was never random. Tank handed Eli a helmet. "All right, little man, you ever been on a Harley before?" Ellie's eyes went wide. "No, sir." "Don't call me sir," Tank grunted. "Makes me sound respectable." The boy grinned, and just like that, the toughest men in Ridgefall melted. The first stop was the open road. The wind hit Ellie's face like freedom itself. He sat in front of Rafe, tiny hands gripping the handlebars that he couldn't really reach. The bike thundered down the desert highway, the horizon stretching forever. Ahead, red earth, blue sky, and the kind of silence only found far from people. Rafe leaned close so the boy could hear him over the roar. "Breathe it in, kid. That's what freedom smells like. It smells like oil and bugs," Eli shouted. Rafe laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. "Yeah, that too." For a moment, the outlaw felt something he hadn't in years, light. They stopped at a roadside diner, Betty's Pancake House, a faded sign hanging by one chain. The kind of place that still served coffee in chip mugs and butter in foil packets. Eli devoured 3 pancakes, the sausages, and half of Rafe's bacon before Rafe even noticed. "Kid, you eat like you're running from the law," Slim joked. Eli shrugged. "We used to move around a lot. Mom said never to waste food, 'cause you don't know when you'll eat again." Rafe nodded quietly, cutting another pancake in half and sliding it to him. Across the booth, Tank muttered, "Hell, he's got better manners than we do." "Yeah," Slim said. "That's what happens when you ain't raised by wolves. Speak for yourself," Tank shot back. Eli giggled again, and for a while, that sound filled the diner better than any jukebox ever could. Even the waitress smiled, handing him a free slice of pie on the way out. The next stop was the clubhouse bar. Not for drinks, but for darts. Eli watched, fascinated, as Rafe hit bullseye after bullseye, his movements sharp and calm. Then Rafe handed him a dart. "Go on. Let's see what you got." Eli squinted, tongue sticking out in concentration, and threw. It missed completely, landing in the wall nowhere near the board. The men erupted in laughter. "Hey," Tank said, "that's one of Ghost's best shots. Not bad for a first try." Rafe said, "Try again. Don't aim at the board. Aim through it." The boy frowned, focused, and this time, the dart hit the edge of the board. He turned around, triumphant. "See, I'm improving." Rafe ruffled his hair. "That's how it starts. Nobody's good at anything until they believe they can be." The other stared. Ghost, the same man who once broke a pool cue over a rival's head, was giving fatherly advice. Slim whispered to Tank, "He's either losing his mind or growing a soul." Tank smirked. Hell, maybe both. By sunset, the day had shifted from novelty to something real. They took Eli to the edge of town, where an old quarry looked out over the valley. The sky was streaked in orange and violet, the air heavy with that strange stillness that comes before the stars wake. Rafe sat beside Eli on a rock, their silhouettes cut against the burning horizon. "You ever had a dad, kid?" Rafe asked quietly. Eli shook his head. "Mom said I didn't need one." She said some dads leave and some don't know how to stay. Rafe stared at the horizon for a long moment. She's right. Eli turned to him. Were you a dad before? The question hit like a bullet he didn't see coming. Rafe's throat tightened. He thought of a woman's face, a tiny pair of shoes, a car wreck on a rain-slick highway years ago. He pushed it down. No, he said finally. Not the way it counts. Eli nodded, as if he understood something deeper than his age should allow. That's okay. You're doing good for a first day. Rafe laughed softly. That's so. Yeah. You listen. Most grown-ups don't. For the second time that day, Rafe found himself unable to speak. But the peace didn't last long. It happened while Eli was showing Slim how to skip stones across the quarry water. The boy mentioned something offhand, like it didn't mean much. Mom said the men in suits would find her again. Rafe froze mid-drag of his cigarette. What men in suits? Eli frowned, thinking. The ones from the van. They came to the clinic once. Mom said they worked for the company she used to work for before she started helping people who didn't pay. Tank glanced at Rafe. Company? What kind of company? Eli shrugged. They said something about shipments. Mom said they were lying. She said people were disappearing because of it. Rafe's stomach turned cold. He'd heard whispers about medical shipments being used as cover for human cargo, the kind of thing only devils in suits could pull off. He crouched down to Ellie's level. You remember anything else? License plates? Names? Eli hesitated. She said if she ever went missing, to tell you they took her because she knew. Silence. Slim cursed under his breath. Jesus, ghost. That ain't no accident. Rafe's eyes hardened. The warmth of the day drained from him, replaced by the old, familiar burn of purpose. That night, when Eli finally fell asleep again, in the clubhouse, curled up in Rafe's leather jacket, the men gathered around the table. Tank poured a drink. So what's the move? Rafe laid Mare's photograph down on the wood. We find her. Slim leaned forward. You don't even know where to start. Rafe opened his phone. I know someone who does. He dialed a number. An old contact named Lena Vega. An ex-hacker turned mechanic who owed him a favor big enough to choke on. Need a trace, he said. Name's Mara Kellen. Last cell ping, last week. Send whatever you get. Lena didn't ask questions. She knew better. 10 minutes later, Rafe's phone buzzed. A single line of text appeared. Last known location, abandoned chemical plant, Highway 47. Slim exhaled. You gotta be kidding me. That place is poison, literally. Tank looked at Rafe. You think she's still alive? Rafe didn't answer. He just stared at the glowing coordinates. She saved me when no one else would, he said finally. Now her kid's sleeping under my roof. I'm not letting her vanish. He stepped outside. The night wind carried sand across the road, whispering through the bones of the desert. The sky was endless and indifferent, the stars watching without judgment. Behind him, Eli stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly. Rafe paused at the doorway, glancing back at the boy, small, fragile, clutching his jacket like a promise. He whispered to himself, one day, huh? The words tasted strange. A promise turned into a mission. Rafe swung a leg over his bike, the engine growling to life. The others followed without question. Helmets snapping on, headlights cutting through the dark like the eyes of steel beasts. The one-day dad had found his purpose. In the desert night, the angels rode again, not for vengeance, not for brotherhood, but for something they'd forgotten how to believe in. Hope. The desert night burned red, not with fire, not yet, but with the kind of light that makes the horizon look like a wound. Rafe Ghost Donovan sat astride his Harley, helmet off, eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the old ridgeline chemical plant. The place looked abandoned, rusted towers, broken glass, the faint pulse of floodlights that shouldn't have been on. But Rafe could feel it. Movement inside, engines humming, people who didn't belong. The others waited in silence behind him. 12 men in leather and steel, their bikes lined up like war horses, breath steaming in the cool desert air. None of them asked questions. They didn't need to. When Ghost gave a look like that, a still, heavy look, it meant something sacred was about to happen. Tank finally broke the silence. You sure she's in there, boss? Rafe checked his phone. The tracker Lena sent pulsing one last location. She's there. Or she was. Slim spat into the dirt. And what about the kid? Rafe turned toward the van parked a few yards behind. Through the cracked window, Eli peered out, his small face pale in the glow of the dashboard. The boy had insisted on coming. had looked Rafe dead in the eye and said, "You can't find her without me." Rafe wanted to tell him no, to lock him away from all this, but something in Ellie's stare was too much like Mara's, stubborn, unbreakable. He walked over to the van, crouched by the door. "You stay put, understand? No matter what happens." Eli nodded, but his hands were trembling. "You'll bring her back." Rafe placed a gloved hand over the boy's. "That's the only plan I've got." For a second, their eyes locked, father for a day and son for a lifetime. Then Rafe stood, pulled his helmet on, and swung back onto his bike. The Angels started their engines. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder, and then they rode. The chemical plant loomed larger with every second. Floodlights cut through the dark, sweeping across the sand. The scent of fuel and rock grew stronger. Rafe raised his hand, signaling the formation. They split into pairs, ghostly figures weaving through the shadows. The gate came into view, rusted chain link, guarded by men in black tactical gear, rifles slung low. Government issue. Not cops, not marks. Something worse. Official ghosts. Slim whispered through the calm. "You want to knock or crash the party?" Rafe revved his engine once. With a damn door. He twisted the throttle. The Harleys roared forward, engines howling, headlights flaring like comets. The guards barely had time to aim before the first gate exploded inward, steel shrieking under the weight of vengeance. What followed wasn't chaos. It was purpose wearing leather, and smoke. The Angels surged through the yard, tires spinning fire off the gravel. Gunfire erupted. Sparks lit the night. One bike went down, sliding across the concrete, but the others pushed through, roaring. Relentless, Rafe was the first inside. He shot past the loading bay, bullets pinging off his handlebars, and skidded behind a concrete pillar. He drew his pistol, heavy, old, and personal, and returned fire with calm precision. Beside him, Tank shouted, "You see her?" Rafe pointed upward, toward the second floor of the processing tower, where a faint light flickered through broken glass. A shadow moved behind it, slender, restrained. Mara. Inside the plant, the air was poison. The floor slick with chemical residue, walls lined with old pipes that hummed with a ghostly pulse. The mercenaries were destroying evidence, boxes of medical supplies, vials, papers stamped with government seals. In the middle of it all, tied to a chair, was Mara Kellen. Her face was bruised, her uniform torn, but her eyes, when they met Rafe's through the shattered glass, were steady. He didn't hesitate. "Tank, take left flank." "Slim, smoke the exits." They moved like a storm. Grenades clattered, smoke hissed, gunfire flared. Rafe sprinted up the stairs two at a time, boots pounding metal. Every bullet that missed felt like borrowed grace. When he reached the top, one of the marks turned elate. Rafe's fist met his jaw, sending him through a window. Another raised a rifle. Rafe slammed the butt of his gun into the man's throat, grabbed him by the vest, and used him as a shield as the others fired. He reached Mara's chair and cut the ropes with a knife. Her wrists were raw, her breath uneven. "Took you long enough," she rasped. Rafe managed a smirk. "Had to get the bike washed first." She tried to stand but stumbled. He caught her, steadying her with an arm around her waist. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "Kid gave me no choice." Her eyes widened. "Ellie's here. Safe for now. Then you need to go." "They'll kill you." Rafe's voice hardened. "They'll try." Down below, the fight had turned into hellfire. Flames leapt from leaking barrels, smoke swallowing the catwalks. The Angels held the line, outnumbered but unbroken. They fought not for turf, not for pride, but for something cleaner. One woman's life. Tank roared over the gunfire, dragging Slim out from behind a crate. "We're getting cooked here, boss." 2 minutes. Rafe shouted, lifting Mara into his arms. As he carried her down the stairwell, bullets whizzed past. One grazed his shoulder, white paint flashing through his body, but he kept moving. He'd been hit before. Pain was just an old friend with bad timing. When he burst through the side door, the air hit like a wave of freedom, hot, acrid, alive. He half ran, half stumbled toward the van. Eli saw them first. He threw the door open and ran toward them, tears blurring his vision. "Mom." Mara's voice cracked. "Baby." Rafe set her down, and she dropped to her knees, pulling Eli into her arms. The boy sobbed into her chest, her hands gripping his hair, his face. As if to make sure he was real, Rafe turned away, giving them a moment that felt holy. But the world wasn't done with them yet. A shout came from the plant, the surviving agents regrouping. Floodlights blazed back to life, illuminating the angels in the open yard. Tank cursed. "We're pinned." Rafe spun, eyes scanning for cover. Then, the faintest rumble, distant but growing. Engines. Dozens of them. Headlights crested the ridge. A line of bikes descending through the dust like a second storm. Logos glinted under the moonlight. Nomads, reapers, wolves, even the sons of dusk. Rival chapters, men who'd sworn never to ride with the Ridgefall Angels again. But Rafe had made the call, and they'd answered. The mercenaries hesitated. Realizing delayed that the desert had turned against them, the newcomers roared into the lot, forming a circle round the plant. Engines howled, horns blared, a symphony of rebellion. Rafe stepped forward, blood on his sleeve, fire in his eyes. "This is our town," he shouted, "and she's under our protection." The first shot cracked, then another, and then the desert became thunder. Bikes charged. Flames rose. The ground shook with fury and faith. Rafe's world became motion, muzzle flash, spinning chrome, shouts drowned by engines. Through it all, Eli clung to his mother inside the van, watching his one-day father ride through the inferno. The reflection of fire danced in his eyes, half terror, half awe. He whispered, "Please come back." The battle didn't last long, but it felt like eternity. When the smoke began to clear, the plant was collapsing, flames licking up the walls, metal shrieking under its own heat. The mercenaries were either dead, gone, or swallowed by the blaze. Rafe limped back toward the van, sun-streaked and bleeding, but still standing. Mara opened the door, tears streaking down her face. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "Just a scratch." Eli launched forward, wrapping his arms around him. "You did it. You saved her." Rafe froze, then slowly hugged the boy back, one arm around the small shoulders, the other gripping his jacket like an anchor. For the first time in years, his chest didn't feel hollow. Behind them, the angels watched in silence. Even Slim wiped his face, muttering, "Damn dust in the air." Tank chuckled softly. "Dust? My ass." By the time sirens began wailing miles away, the night was nearly over. The rival bikers were already disappearing into the desert. Engines fading into legend. The Ridgefall Angels loaded what they could into their trucks. Medical files, stolen drives, proof that Mara had been right all along. Rafe looked back at the burning plant, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "She was never just a nurse," he said quietly. "She was trying to stop something bigger." Mara touched his arm. "You didn't have to save me." He met her gaze. "Yeah, I did." She smiled faintly. "I told Eli to find the man with the skull tattoo. I knew you'd still have a soul under there somewhere." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Don't spread that around. I've got a reputation to keep." Eli leaned against him, eyes half closed, the exhaustion of the night finally catching up. "You can be my dad for more than one day now, right?" Rafe hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, kid. I think I can manage that." As dawn broke, the desert was quiet again. Smoke curled into the sunrise. The angels stood beside their bikes, faces lit by gold and ash. They weren't heroes, not in the world's eyes, but that night, they'd done what no law ever could. They'd saved one of their own, not because they had to, but because it was right. And for a man named Ghost, that was enough. He started his bike, the roar echoing across the canyon, and the angels followed him home, leaving behind fire, memory, and the first trace of redemption in a long, long time. The desert had gone silent again. No engines, no shouts, no gunfire. Only the hiss of cooling metal and the soft crackle of what was left of the ridgeline chemical plant. By sunrise, the fire was dying, leaving behind blackened skeletons of steel and the acrid perfume of smoke. The sirens were still miles away, distant, disinterested, late as always. The law would come eventually, too late to matter, too early for anyone to care. Rafe Ghost Donovan stood by his Harley, watching the smoke twist into the pale light. His cut, the angel skull embroidered across his back, was singed, torn along one shoulder. Blood had dried across his collarbone. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of still being alive. He took one last look at the plant. Then he turned his bike toward home. The Ridgefall Angels clubhouse sat at the edge of town, half saloon, half sanctuary. By morning, the place smelled of whiskey and antiseptic. Mara's doing inside. The men moved like ghosts themselves. No one spoke much. They were bandaging wounds, cleaning weapons, pouring coffee like penance. The adrenaline had burned off hours ago, leaving only exhaustion and a strange, humming quiet they didn't know what to do with. Rafe pushed open the office door. And there she was, Mara alive. She sat on the old leather couch, wrapped in a blanket too big for her, sunlight pooling over her bruised face. Her hair was still damp from a makeshift wash, her wrists wrapped in gauze. Eli slept beside her, curled up under her arm, a small patch of peace in a world that rarely offered any. For a long moment, Rafe just stood there, afraid that moving would make it vanish. Mara noticed him and smiled faintly. "You look worse than me," he smirked. "You should see the other guys." Her eyes softened. "I did." He crossed the room and sat opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The floor between them held too much history, years, regrets, things unsaid. "You remember that night?" she asked quietly. "The highway outside Santa Fe?" "How could I forget?" he said. "You pulled a bullet out of me with a pair of tweezers and half a bottle of tequila. You screamed. I grunted. You begged me to knock you out." He allowed himself a ghost of a smile. Semantics. They both laughed softly, a sound that felt like breathing after drowning. Then Mara's expression changed, the humor dimming. "When I saw what they were doing, moving people like cargo under medical cover, I knew I couldn't stop it alone. They had government clearance, ghost accounts, shell clinics. When I found out they'd use my name to move one of the shipments, I ran. I knew they'd come for me." Rafe's jaw tightened. "And you sent the boy to find me?" She nodded. "I told him to find the man with the skull tattoo. I didn't know if you'd still be alive, but if you were, I knew you'd protect him." Rafe leaned back, eyes distant. "You put a lot of faith in a man like me." "No," Mara said softly. "I put faith in the man I knew you were, the one who took a bullet for his brother, and still apologized to the cop who shot him. You're not a bad man, Rafe. You just forgot how to be a good one." That landed like a punch he didn't dodge. He looked down, rubbing his knuckles. The same hands that had killed, protected, built, broken. "Maybe," he murmured, "but I didn't forget what death feels like. You don't owe me anything." "Yeah," he said, meeting her eyes. "I do." Eli stirred on the couch, mumbling in his sleep before blinking awake. He saw Rafe and smiled the kind of smile that could split the hardest armor. "You didn't leave." Rafe shook his head. "Not my style." The boy sat up, hair sticking up, still holding the crumpled photograph, the one he carried all the way through the desert. He looked at it for a long time before handing it to Rafe. "This time," Eli said, voice small but certain, "it's for you to keep." Rafe took it carefully, like it might break. The photo was worn, edges curled, Mara in her nurse's uniform, smiling at something outside the frame. A little handprint smudged the corner. He wanted to say something, "Thank you," maybe, but the words jammed in his throat. Instead, he reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. "You did good, kid." Eli grinned. "Mom says you don't smile much." "She's right." "Then I'll make you." Rafe blinked. "Oh yeah?" The boy nodded solemnly. "You're my dad now, at least for one more breakfast." Something in the room cracked, not loud, not visible, just the sound of a heart remembering how to beat. Mara watched them quietly, her eyes glassy. She didn't interrupt. She knew what this was, a small miracle stitched out of ruin. They all ate together at the bar, pancakes again, because Eli insisted. The men pretended to complain, but none of them did. Tank flipped the griddle. Slim found a bottle of syrup, and even Stone, who never smiled at anything human, cut his pancakes into neat triangles for the kid. It was the strangest sight Ridgefall had ever seen. A table of leather-clad killers laughing softly at a child's joke. When Eli spilled his milk, Rafe reached over without thinking, wiping it up with a rag. The gesture was simple, but it stopped Mara cold. For one fleeting second, he looked like a father, not a stand-in, not a savior, just a man who cared. Eli climbed into his lap mid-breakfast, content as a cat. "You smell like smoke," he said. Rafe chuckled. "Better than motor oil." The boy grinned. "You smell like both." The laughter that followed wasn't forced. It was real, fragile, but alive. By mid-morning, the safe car arrived. A rusted station wagon driven by one of Mara's old friends from the clinic network. They lay low, head east, find another name, another start. Eli didn't like it. He clung to Rafe's jacket, eyes filling with tears he didn't want anyone to see. "Can't we stay? Just for a while?" Mara crouched beside him. "Sweetheart, we can't, but we'll be okay, and he'll be right here." Eli turned to Rafe. "You promise?" Rafe knelt, meeting him eye to eye. "Yeah. You ever need me, you come back to Ridgefall. The angels don't forget family." The boy nodded, biting his lip. You'll keep the picture, right? Rafe smiled, quiet and sad, always, and then Eli did something that broke him clean in two. He hugged him, tight, desperate, and whispered, "Bye, Dad." The word hit Rafe like shrapnel. Not because it was loud, because it was true. He didn't cry, couldn't. But something inside him cracked open, a rusted lock finally giving way. He put a hand on the back of the boy's head, holding him for a moment longer than necessary, memorizing the weight of the small body against his chest. When Mara came to take Ellie's hand, she paused, her gaze meeting Rafe's one last time. There was gratitude there, and something else, a quiet understanding between the people who survived the same darkness and found a fragment of light in it. "Take care of yourself, Ghost," she said softly. He almost laughed. Not likely, but she smiled anyway. "Try." When the car finally disappeared down the dirt road, the clubhouse fell into stillness again. The angels lingered outside, watching the dust trail fade into the horizon. Tank clapped Rafe on the shoulder. "You good, boss?" Rafe didn't answer. He just stared at the empty road. Slim lit a cigarette, exhaling slow. "Never thought I'd see the day we went all hero for a nurse and her kid." Tank grinned. "Ain't every day we get called angels for real." Rafe gave a quiet laugh. "Don't get used to it." But deep down, he knew something had shifted in all of them. They'd fought for more than pride or territory. They'd fought for meaning Dot, and for one night, at least, they'd found it later. Rafe sat alone on the clubhouse steps, the desert wind tugging at his jacket. The sun was higher now, slicing through the smoke. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph, creased, stained, still warm from his hand. He studied it for a long time. Mara's smile, the faint background of a hospital ward, and there, barely visible in the corner, a boy's reflection in the glass behind her. He traced it with his thumb. Ghost. That was what they called him, because he lived through too many things that should have killed him. But sitting there, watching the day unfold, he realized something he never had before. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a man with something worth remembering. That night, Ridgefall slept easier. Word spread through the bars and truck stops, whispers of the angels of fire, the outlaws who rode through hell to save a woman and her child. No one could prove it. The cops wrote it off as a chemical accident. The government files disappeared like dust. But the people remembered. They remembered the roar of engines in the dark. They remembered the fire that looked like wings. And they remembered the man who'd once been nothing until a little boy called him Dad. Rafe didn't keep the photo in his wallet. He kept it taped to the mirror behind the bar, where the morning light always hit it first. Every sunrise after that, he'd look at it once before the day began, a small, private reminder that even men like him could have one good thing they didn't destroy. He'd never say it aloud, but the others could tell. Something had changed in their leader. His voice was quieter now. His temper, shorter with fools, but softer with brothers. And sometimes, when a lost kid wandered close to the wrong crowd, Rafe would find him a job sweeping the floor or fixing bikes. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. And so, the legend of Ridgefall grew, not written in papers, but whispered on the wind, about the night the outlaws became angels. Not because they followed the law, but because they followed their hearts. And somewhere out on a long desert highway, a boy in the back seat of a station wagon pressed his forehead to the window, watching the road stretch behind him. He smiled and whispered, "Ride safe, Dad."